This is Deadly Truths, and I'm Becca. Deadly Truths covers real crimes from history, the violence, the corruption, and the human damage that came with them. This show is not here to glamorize gangsters or rewrite the past. Everything you hear is based on documented sources, and some details remain disputed due to the age of the cases. Listener discretion is advised. If you're listening and you're not following yet, fix that. Hit follow, share it, drop a rating. It helps more than you think. Kansas City mob was not an accident. It didn't rise from local bootleggers or street thugs clawing their way up. Kansas City became a mafia city because someone allowed it to be one. Someone who believed that organized crime should be centralized, streamlined, and governed like a corporation instead of a street gang. That someone was not in Kansas City at all. He was 900 miles away walking the streets of New York with a cigarette in his mouth and a knife scar down his cheek. His name was Charles Lucky Luciano. The man who rewired the American underworld and created the system the Kansas City mob would follow for the next 50 years. Before Luciano, the mob was chaos. Old world bosses clinging to tradition. Turf wars spilling into the streets, prohibition money burning holes in everyone's pockets. After Luciano, everything changed. Families were structured. Territories were recognized. Disputes were settled by votes instead of bullets. And Kansas City became an official piece of that national power map. But here's the part most people don't know. Lucky almost never lived long enough to build any of it. In the spring of 1929, just as the underworld was shifting, just as prohibition was peaking, just as violence was about to force a national reorganization, Lucky was grabbed off a sidewalk, beaten, tortured, stabbed, and left for dead on a beach. Somebody wanted him erased before he became too powerful. Instead, they created a legend. That night did not break Lucky. It forged him. And the blueprint of the modern American Mafia, the Commission, the Five Families, the National Syndicate, was born out of the man who refused to die. So before Lucky became the guy who builds the Commission, he was just Charlie Luciano. He was born Salvatore, a tough little Sicilian kid who figured out early that New York was not handing out opportunities. You had to take them. By the late 1920s, Charlie isn't just another bootlegger. He's rising strategist in the New York underworld. He's making alliances the old bosses don't approve of. He's making alliances with Jews, with the Irish, and other Italians, whoever can make money. This is already rubbing the old guard raw, especially his mentor turned liability, Joe the Boss. Joe the Boss is more the old way. If you're Sicilian, you're in. If you're not, get lost. Lucky thinks that's stupid. He's watching Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Dutch Schultz, all of them making money while the traditionalists sit around arguing about what street corner belongs to who. You know what happens when you threaten old men with new ideas. They try to wipe you off the map. And that brings us to April of 1929. It starts like any other night. Lucky is walking near Times Square, and no, he's not flanked by bodyguards like in the movies. Charlie was cocky, sometimes reckless. He thought he was untouchable. A group of men pull up, grab him, and force him into a car. This is not a friendly conversation. It's not even a warning. This is a hit. Some say the men were working for the boss. Some say it was rival bootleggers. Some say somebody he crossed in Havana. We may never know. But here is what is documented. Luciano is taken to a warehouse out on the Hudson. They beat him, they break his ribs, they crush his face, they stab him repeatedly with an ice pick, including his throat, which is why you see those scars in every later photo of him. And just to make sure the job is done, they dump him on Reeves Beach on Coney Island, assuming he'll bleed into the sand and die before sunrise. Except he does not die. A fisherman finds him the next morning. He's barely breathing, swollen beyond recognition, and somehow alive. The cops ask him who did it. And Lucky, in peak I ain't no rat energy, basically says, I didn't see nothing. I don't know nothing. And even if I did, I'm not telling you. He's half dead. Looks like he's lost a fight with a train and is still refusing to cooperate. He checks himself out of the hospital early. His friends think he's insane. His enemies think he's finished. But here's the plot twist. This was not the end of Lucky. It was the beginning. The attack made Charlie realize something brutally simple. If he did not restructure the mob was going to kill itself and him with it. So when he heals, mostly he never looks the same again, he starts planning. Not revenge, not retaliation, a complete corporate takeover of organized crime. This is the turning point. This night, the beating, the stabbing, the dump on the beach is the spark that leads directly into the war, the fall of his boss, and the rise of Lucky Luciano, and the creation of the five families. If they hadn't tried to kill him, he probably never would have built the commission. So congratulations to whoever ordered that hit. You accidentally invented the modern American mafia. So after Lucky survives the let's beat him to death and hope nobody notices beach incident, he walks right back into a mob world that's about to explode. And I don't mean shootouts in alleys, I mean a full-scale mafia civil war. This is 1930. Prohibition is minting millionaires. Bootlegging money is turning street gangs into empires. And the old school Sicilian bosses are terrified of losing control. The war kicks off between two powerhouses. You've got Joe the boss, the old rigid traditionalist, runs his operation like it's still 1890. Sicilians only, no outsiders, no innovation. He's losing money, he's losing men, and he's losing his mind. And then you have Salvatore, the Roman general of the underworld. Sharp, calculated, former bookkeeper, thinks the mafia should run like an ancient empire. He believes he should be the Caesar of an American underworld. These two men absolutely despise each other, and every mobster in New York is being forced to pick a side. Luciano wants no part of this. He thinks the war is stupid. It's a fight over old world pride while money is flying off trucks. But Joe is his boss. And in the mafia, boss loyalty isn't a suggestion, it is survival. We've discussed this in the previous episode. So Lucky pretends to stand by his boss while building quiet alliances with others like Meyer, Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, and Frank Costello, and the younger generation who actually want to make money. People start dying at a rate that makes prohibition homicide stats look peaceful. There's drive-by shootings, car bombs, ambushes outside restaurants, slow personal executions, bodies in vacant lots, bodies in the river, bodies nobody finds. It's a slaughter. Newspapers call it the Mafia War, but inside the streets, everyone knows exactly what is happening. Two old men are burning down the city to prove which one is king. Lucky sees both sides and thinks, these idiots are going to get me killed twice. Remember, he's already survived one assassination attempt. He knows the clock is ticking. Behind closed doors, the younger generation of mobsters form what we would now call a strategic coalition. But in 1930 gangsters' terms, it's basically, hey, what if we stop letting dinosaurs run things? The goal is simple. Stop the war, remove both bosses, restructure structured the entire mafia. Lucky becomes the guy in the middle. He tells his boss one thing, he tells the other boss another thing. Both men trust him. That's their mistake. By 1931, Joe the boss realizes Lucky is not fully committed. He calls Lucky into a meeting and basically gives him the mob version of, hey, pick a side or die. And Lucky, and this is the part that shows why he becomes Lucky, decides the only way to survive is to end the war, and that means to end his boss. He goes to the other side. He tells them, hey, I can help take out my boss. Now, of course, this is just temporary because Luciano already knows that after his boss is gone, the other boss will be as well. This is not mob stuff. This is chess. Later, Joe the boss thinks Lucky is just coming to a friendly card game. He doesn't know that Lucky is already done with him. And that brings us right to the most famous mob hit in early American mafia history, the murder of Joe the Boss in the Coney Island restaurant. By 1931, Joe the Boss is losing the war. He's paranoid, he's broke, and bleeding soldiers faster than he can recruit them. And the guy he trusts most, Lucky Luciano, is the one quietly building the firing squad. Joe the Boss has been running New York's underworld like it's his personal fiefdom. Territory disputes, rigid contracts, loyalty enforced by fear and superstition. He's old school to his bones, and Luciano knows the future can't be built under him. So behind his back, he strikes his deal with the rival. The agreement is simple. If he delivers his boss, that will end the war. Luciano becomes the real power behind the scenes. Now he just needs a moment when his boss feels safe, relaxed, and vulnerable. So, Coney Island, April 15th, 1931. He invites Lucky to lunch, a quiet little restaurant on Coney Island, middle of the day, a place where you go to eat, not get shot. Lucky shows up early. He's calm, better than calm. He's acting like this is just another business lunch. He sits, he chats, he eats, and he jokes. He even plays cards at the table. But the entire time, he knows exactly what's about to happen. This is the moment that separates Lucky from every other gangster in his era. He's about to murder the man who raised him in the underworld, and he's doing it not out of rage, not for revenge, but because business requires it. The new world he wants cannot exist under this old boss. In one of the coldest moves in mob history, Charles excuses himself to the bathroom like he needs a moment, like he's stepping away from the card game. Joe, the boss, keeps playing cards. He does not flinch. He doesn't think twice. He never sees it coming. Charlie handpicked a team and they walk in through the front door. That team is Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, who is fast, violent, and does not miss. And then there was Vito Genesi, future powerhouse, cold as stone. There was Albert Anastasia, later the head of Murder Inc., and then Joe Adonis, smooth, ruthless, and trusted by Lucky. This is the equivalent of sending in the Avengers if the Avengers settled everything with bullets. They surround the boss. He looks up just long enough to register that betrayal. Then they unload. Bullets rip through the restaurant. The cards he was holding scatter across the table. The famous photo shows them frozen in time. Joe the boss is dead before he hits the floor. And here's the darkly hilarious, ridiculously cold part. Lucky steps out of the bathroom after the hit, dusts himself off, and walks through the chaos as if he had no idea that anything went down. Cops later ask him where he was. His answer? I was in the bathroom. You'd think I'd stick around for that. That is vintage Luciano. Smart, sarcastic, and impossible to pin. With his boss gone, the other boss declares himself the boss of all bosses. The shooting stops, and the war is effectively over. Lucky becomes the golden boy. But this is temporary. In the old world, it dies right there in the restaurant. But Lucky knows something that the new boss does not. If his boss was past, then the new obstacle is the current one. So while everyone else is celebrating the end of the war, Lucky is already planning his next move, the move that will shape organized crime forever. That's where we go next. So, with Joe the boss out of the picture, you think peace finally hits New York, but no, because the man who steps in, Salvatore Maranzano, decides he's not just the new boss, he wants to be an emperor. After that war, he calls a massive meeting in New York. He announces himself as the boss of all bosses. He lays out these strict rules. Pure Sicilians only, no mixing ethnic groups. Everyone pays tribute. Everyone follows his chain of command. He's basically recreating ancient Rome. He even compares mob hierarchy to Roman legions. I mean, really? You've got Meyer-Lansky making millions with bootlegging math, and this guy is quoting Caesar. Luciano is sitting there thinking this is exactly the kind of old world nonsense that got us into the war in the first place. But of course, he's not saying that out loud. He nods politely. Never play your hand too early. Within a few months, the new boss realizes that Lucky isn't just intelligent, he's dangerous. He's too connected, he's too modern, too forward thinking, and worst of all, the younger generation respects Lucky more than they respect the so called emperor. So he starts seeing ghosts everywhere. He's convinced Lucky wants to overthrow him, which, to be fair, Lucky absolutely does. So he hires a hitman to kill Luciano. Not just any killer, Irish gangsters, because they wouldn't be recognized by the Italians. He hires Vincent Mad Dog Cole to wipe Luciano out. This is where he makes a fatal miscalculation. He assumes Lucky doesn't have informants. Lucky has informants everywhere. Within hours, Lucky hears about the plot. The clock is ticking. Now it's Lucky Luciano versus Salvatore, and only one man is walking out alive. And if you know anything about history, you know who that guy is gonna be. So this is where Lucky proves he's not just a criminal, he's also a strategist. He calls in his inner circle. Again, we've got Meyer-Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, Frank Costello. They create a plan so bold it could only come from the next generation. Plan is to use a hitman that would never be suspected, a Jewish gunman disguised as law enforcement. This is genius for three reasons. They bypass the Sicilian-only security, they strike before the Irish hit squad can move, and they send a message. The mob is multinational now. Old rules are dead. So the new boss, he's sitting in the Manhattan office, the 9th floor of the New York Central Building. He's meeting with taxmen, sorting records, because yes, even the emperor needed accountants. There were 4 men that arrived dressed as IRS agents. They had clipboards, suits, badges. Everything looks legit. So the old boss, who loves paperwork almost as much as he loves power, he lets them in. He thinks they're there to talk about finances. They are, just not in the way that he expects. The fake agents disarm his guards, they corner the emperor, and they attack. Stab wounds, throat slashes, gunshots. I mean, he basically goes down like Caesar did back in the day. This is not rage, though. This is surgical, and it is a message. Within minutes, he's dead. The emperor has fallen. The same night his body hits the morgue, Lucky calls the remaining bosses into a meeting. And instead of declaring himself the new boss of bosses, he does something that no one expects. He abolishes the title completely. He says, one man in charge, that's how wars start. Instead, he creates something brand new. It's called the Commission, a national board of directors for organized crime. Every family has a vote. Disputes are settled at the table, not with bullets. Money flows clean. Territories are recognized, and Kansas City gets its seat in the structure in the decades that follow. If they would have stuck to this, the mob would probably still be around. However, as we know, things went horribly wrong and people started killing each other regardless. But anyways, this is where Lucky stops being a hustler and becomes the architect of modern organized crime. He does not rule the mafia, he organizes it. And that is why he becomes legendary. And honestly, in my opinion, I'm sure you can tell by the way I'm telling this story, when it comes to mob history, I find Lucky Luciano to be one of the most fascinating figures. And I'll also get into some more reasons why I think that. But his rise is not over. Because once you build an empire, guess who comes knocking? The U.S. government. This is another tidbit that most people don't know about Lucky. And again, I think it's great. By the way, if you have not read any of the biographies done on him, I recommend you do. So, the U.S., we have World War II, Naval Intelligence, and a secret deal that sounds like fiction, but it is 100% real. Before we go into further with Lucky's rise, let's stop and answer the question everyone is probably asking at this point. You don't really know about the history of Lucky Luciano. What kind of man was he? Was Lucky a psychopath? Or was he just a kid shaped by a world that he grew up in? It's not a simple answer. I mean, whatever is. So here's the straight version, the one that actually holds up with history, psychology, and behavior. Let's be blunt. A lot of mobsters were true sociopaths. They had zero empathy, impulsive cruelty. They were thrill-seeking. There was no loyalty on more than one occasion, and no emotional connections. Lucky was not that. If he were, he wouldn't have built a long-term alliance and alliances. He would not have been able to maintain friendships from his childhood. He would not have been able to listen to advisors. And he also valued stability over chaos. He cared about organizational structure, and he pursued peace over endless warfare. So all of this points to the fact that he definitely was not a sociopath. Sociopaths don't build corporations, they burn them down. Lucky built the Commission, the first real corporate-style governing board in American organized crime. That takes impulse control, future planning, emotional detachment, yes, but not psychopathy. Lucky grew up in the Lower East Side when it was basically the Hunger Games for immigrant kids, okay? I mean, there were no safety nets, there was no stable housing, gangs on every block, corrupt police, survival through violence. It was normalized. If you were not tough, you did not last. He started as a street kid running errands and protection rackets because that was the economy that was available to him. And you still see this in a lot of inner cities today. I mean, is it as bad as it was in like Hell's Kitchen back in the day when he was growing up? No, I don't think anything in America could possibly be as bad as that was back then, but there's some places still in America and a lot of large cities that do still resemble this. So for him, crime was not rebellion, it was employment. Instead of viewing him as a sociopath, the accurate lens is this: he adapted to a brutal world by becoming smarter, faster, and more strategic than the next guy. This is where he differs from men like Albert Anastasia or Bugsy Siegel. Lucky could be cold, absolutely. He signed off on murders like it was corporate paperwork, but he also protected his childhood friends. He supported his parents financially. He carried guilt about his mother's disappointment. He showed loyalty to mah-SAIR-ee-uh for his life. He maintained long-term relationships, as I had mentioned, and he felt genuine pride when young men came up under him. I mean, that's kind of sweet. This is not psychopathy. What it is compartmentalization. He had to do it. He cared inside his circle, and everyone outside it was a chess piece. Lucky had zero interest in cruelty. He had zero interest in chaos. He had zero interest in ego battles and zero interest in old world mafia rituals. He cared about money, efficiency, power through organization, and not through violence. He was not the guy who wanted to punish you. He was the guy who wanted to replace you if you became inefficient. In modern clinical terms, he shows traits of high cognitive empathy. Understanding people. Low emotional empathy, not feeling their suffering. He wasn't really into that, but he had excellent executive function. He was a planner, an organizer, and he was big on strategy, and he had strong impulse control compared to all of his peers. Big time, right? So, what this could be is trauma-conditioned leadership inside a criminal ecosystem. He did not kill for thrill. He killed for efficiency. He didn't create chaos. He eliminated chaos. He didn't see murder as emotional, saw it as restructuring. And that's why he ended that war. Not out of rage, but because it was bad for business, and that tells you everything. Lucky Luciano was not a sociopath. He was a man shaped by poverty, sharpened by violence, and elevated by intelligence. He didn't crave blood. He craved order. In the underworld he inherited, order only came after the bodies were cleared away. So after the big bosses fall and the commission forms, Lucky Luciano becomes the architect of modern organized crime. But then something happens that nobody could have predicted. It's not the mob, not law enforcement, not Luciano himself. It's the United States government who comes knocking. And yes, this is all documented. So let's set the stage. Let's go to the 1940s and World War II. So it's obviously warring across Europe, right? The United States is suddenly dealing with national security nightmares. They're worried about sabotage on the docks, German U-boats hitting supply lines, Italian and German spies trying to infiltrate New York harbors, union corruption threatening wartime logistics. Then the real panic hits. The SS Normandy catches fire at the New York Pier in 1942. The Normandy was one of the fastest ships in the world, being converted into a U.S. troop transport. It was docked at Pier 88. It goes up in flames, massive, uncontrolled, a total loss. The Navy suspects sabotage. Suddenly, someone realizes a simple truth. The U.S. government does not control the docks. The Mafia does. And who controls the Mafia? Lucky Luciano. Even though he's imprisoned, Luciano is sitting in a prison. He's serving 30 to 50 years sentence for compulsory prostitution, a conviction most historians agree was heavily inflated by prosecutors in order to get him in jail in the first place, right? So the Navy and the Office of Naval Intelligence quietly approach Charlie's attorney. They want a meeting. Their request is simple and absolutely insane. Help us secure the ports and we'll consider reducing your sentence. This becomes Operation Underworld, classified, secret, and denied for decades. But obviously, all this information has been released now. So Luciano still controlled the commission, the dock workers' unions, the waterfront rackets, the men who controlled every crate, every ship, and every cargo manifest. past. Even behind bars, his word carried more weight than any badge, judge, or politician. The Navy needed intelligence on suspicious dock workers, surveillance on the harbors, access to informants, cooperation from longshoresmen, a guarantee that no one would sabotage the military supplies. Luciano gives it to him, all of it. The government promised better prison conditions, influence in parole hearings, eventual deportation instead of lifelong imprisonment. Luciano promised peace on the docks, intelligence pipelines, protection of military cargo, control of the unions during wartime. It was the strangest partnership in American history, and the thing is, it worked. Sabotage dropped, intelligence improved, union cooperation stabilized. The Navy credited Luciano's influence quietly. By 1946, New York's government commutes Luciano's sentence with one condition: he must be deported to Italy. So Lucky, the man who once ruled the American underworld, gets escorted from prison to Ellis Island and put on a ship. Irony at its finest. He saved America's ports, but wasn't allowed to set foot on American soil again. But deportation did not end his power. In fact, it became the start of his next empire, one involving Sicily, heroin routes, international trafficking, and post-war criminal globalization. That's where we go next. So Lucky gets deported in 1946, technically a free man, but practically exiled. He steps off the ship in Naples thinking he's finished in America. Everyone assumes the same thing. His power base is gone, his commission seat is gone, and he's surrounded by Italian cops who shouted him like he's carrying the plague. But here's the thing about Lucky. He was never just a gangster. He was an organizer. And organizers don't retire, they relocate. Post-World War II Naples is not a city, it is a bruise. The Allies bombed it heavily. People are starving. The black market is the only real economy. And the Sicilian Mafia, who his old boss was tied to, is re-emerging. Lucky arrives and immediately understands this landscape. Police corruption, desperate civilians, shattered infrastructure, a criminal vacuum, American GIs acting like walking wallets. It's chaos. Exactly the environment Luciano knows how to control. But he doesn't seize power by force. He does it the way he always has. He builds alliances. Even though he's across the ocean, Lucky's name is still gospel to many bosses back home. Guys like Frank Costello, Meyer Lansky, and Vito Genovese, who, by the way, also got deported and wants to push Luciano out. Some want his advice, some want his blessing, some want him out of the way. Luciano does not fight it, he uses it. He becomes what we would now call an international consultant for organized crime. He does not need to be in New York to influence New York. By late 1946, going into 1947, Charlie travels secretly to Cuba, yes, Cuba, with fake paperwork and a network of bribed officials. This is the Havana Conference, one of the most important criminal summits in history. Every major mob figure shows up. Costello, Lansky, Genovese, the Chicago outfit, even representatives from Kansas City. They meet to discuss gambling, narcotics, post-war rackets, and Lucky's role. Luciano wants one thing: a return to power. Not to the throne, but a position of influence. At first, it does work. He mediates disputes, he makes money for everyone, the old respect is still there. But then the US government finds out where he is, and they pressure Cuba to kick him out. So Lucky loses his island refuge and gets dumped right back in Italy. Vito, who is his fellow deportee and longtime frenemy, sees Lucky's exile as an opportunity. Vito wants New York. He wants the commission. He wants the Lucky legacy without the Lucky loyalty. So he spreads rumors. Luciano is losing touch, he's weak, he's obsolete. He doesn't control the heroin routes. And here's the truth. Lucky is losing grip, but only geographically. Influence? He still has plenty of that. Historians debate Lucky's exact role in the post-war heroin trade. Here's what's documented. He had connections in Sicily. He had connections in France during the French Connection era. He had connections in U.S. distribution networks. He had the organizational brain to connect all three. Did Lucky personally run a heroin empire? No, he was not hands-on anymore. But did he greenlight it, facilitate it, and profit from it? Very likely. This became the early foundation of the heroin boom of the 1950s and 60s. And admittedly, much as I like Lucky, you can't deny this is pretty nasty. And that, of course, made law enforcement obsess over him again. No surprise there. By the late 1950s, Lucky is no longer the kingmaker. He's the elder statesman of crime. Now, he is still respected. He is still feared. He is still consulted, but he is not central. He spends most of his time under surveillance, giving quiet advice, drinking coffee in small cafes, and living off past power. But don't mistake that for failure. He built that system. He rewrote those rules. Everything in American organized crime still traces back to him. And even in exile, even in decline, Lucky knows exactly who he is, the man who created the modern mafia and survived every person who tried to kill him along the way. Before we close out Lucky Luciano's story, we need to zoom out and look at the man behind that empire, not just the hits and the politics and the commission, but, who he was really, right? What shaped him? And what did he believe in? And why did so many gangsters, even the violent psychos, respect him almost to the point of worship? Let's break it down in a way that makes sense, chronologically, psychologically, and honestly. Luciano was born in Sicily in 1897, and he came to New York as a kid. It was the Lower East Side. It was overcrowded. Now, that neighborhood, it had no safety. It had no structure. It had no access to normal childhoods, constant violence, constant threat. And that does something to a kid. Lucky figured out early that fear can be used. Alliances mattered. Being smart is more valuable than being strong. He was not the biggest guy, he was not the meanest, and he was not the strongest, but he was the one who thought. That's the root of everything that follows. Lucky is not romantic, he's not sentimental. His worldview is brutally simple. Chaos gets you killed, order keeps you alive. That's why he ended that war. That's why he killed two bosses. That's why he built the commission. That's why he partnered with the government when he had to. And that's why he controlled unions and ports like a CEO, not a thug. He wasn't trying to be the king of New York. He was trying to build a system that outlived him. Most gangsters are impulsive. Lucky was all about strategy. Most gangsters think about tonight. Lucky thought about 10 years from now. And that's why he survived. And most likely, I'm going to be doing episodes on some of his closest friends who, in their own way, are almost just as fascinating. One that I think is definitely up there is mah-rahn-ZAH-no. This was a lifelong friend of Lucky's. And then there's Frank Costello. That was his diplomat, so to speak. Everybody knows about Bugsy Siegel. I think, obviously this guy, there's a lot of coverage on him. He was the reckless younger brother figure. And then there was Joe Adonis. He was the enforcer and the loyalist. To tell you the truth, one of them that I do think holds as much weight as Lucky is mah-rahn-ZAH-no. And I don't think a lot of people know as much as they probably should about him if you're interested in American history. And then, of course, you've got Vito Genovese, his frenemy, who did betray him later. So Lucky valued loyalty and intelligence and competence, and he did not value ego, rigidity, old world pride, blowhards, and emotional hotheads. I like that about him. because who likes a blowhard? He famously had no patience for mobsters who acted like opera singers, quote, as he called them, dramatic, territorial, easily offended. His friendships were real. He cried when Bugsy Siegel was killed, and he stayed loyal to Lansky and Costello for life. That tells you everything. Luciano's loyalty was not blind and it was not emotional. It was transactional, but not in a cold way. He believed if you were good to him, he'd be good to you. If you crossed him, you were done. Loyalty is currency. Betrayal is non-negotiable. He wasn't loyal to bosses. He was loyal to his friends. And if you think about who he betrayed, those old world bosses, and you think, well, that sounds pretty treacherous. He betrayed them because they were obsolete and they were also dangerous, but he never betrayed Lansky, Costello, or the men who rose with him. And this is where Luciano's legend becomes clear. He was actually surrounded by a lot of violent, unpredictable, psychopathic killers. And they were guys like Albert Anastasia, Dutch Schultz, Joe Bonanno, Tommy Lucchese. They all respected him because he didn't waste lives. He didn't start unnecessary wars. He did not micromanage. He didn't pretend to be a king. He didn't hover above the commission. He sat with it, with the other bosses, and he shared power instead of hoarding it. And that's why the Mafia thrived after him for a good amount of time. He didn't make himself the empire. He made the structure for the empire. Every mob family that exists today in New York, New Jersey, Chicago, even in Kansas City still follows that blueprint that he built. This is permanent influence. Lucky was not the toughest guy. He was not the deadliest. He was not the flashiest or the richest. What he was the man who could see the whole board when everybody else was only looking at the next move. He turned a street gang into a syndicate, turned chaos into structure, and turned himself into the blueprint every mobster after him wanted to copy or tried to. And if they didn't, they definitely failed. Lucky did not live forever, but that system did. So when you look back on Lucky Luciano, it's easy to get blinded by the myth, the sharp suits, the commission, Havana, the government deal, the exile. But the truth underneath all of it is simple. Lucky Luciano was the man who finally dragged the American underworld out of the alley and into the boardroom. Not the strongest, not the scariest, not the loudest. He was the one who understood that violence without structure is suicide and loyalty without strategy is useless, that power without organization collapses under its own weight. And whether you admire him or you hate what he created, the fact remains every mob family that rose after him in New York, Chicago, Kansas City, Detroit, Vegas, all of them operated inside the system that Luciano designed. But we can definitely not pretend that Lucky's world did not spill blood along the way. Men died in that war. Bosses were executed. Families were destroyed. Communities were terrorized. Violence did not end. It just became more efficient. So when we talk about the legacy, we're not glorifying it. We're acknowledging the truth. He industrialized a criminal empire, and the ripple effect shaped nearly a century of American crime. And as always, it's important to remember the people caught in that crossfire, the men murdered in that war, the victims of the union rackets, the women and families left behind by a machine built on intimidation and blood. Organized crime is not entertainment for people who lived under it. It's trauma. It's loss. It's generational damage. Lucky Luciano left his blueprint, but countless ordinary people paid the cost of the world he engineered. I'm Becca, and this was Deadly Truths, where we don't romanticize history, we dig into it, even if I might get excited when I'm talking about certain historical figures. So we're going to expose it, and we follow it wherever the bodies are buried. Because remember, the past is not dead. It's just being forged in the American murder factory. If you want more deep dives like this, the stories everyone thinks they know, but no one ever told right. Make sure you follow, rate, and share. Your follows and reviews keep these forgotten histories alive and push the show to new listeners. As always, thank you again to the listeners who keep coming back, who do follow and do rate. You guys really matter more than you know.